A man with dirty yellow hair looked in horror at the barbarian, who was a head taller than them and trembled in fear. A man with long black hair pierced the night with bright golden eyes and said that a dog that grins at its master is useless. The next moment, the prince of the kingdom of Irugo emotionlessly kicked the knight of the Sylvanus Empire, so much so that he flew across the deflection quite far away. The knight who swore at the princess fell face down on the floor. The prince looked emotionlessly at the one whom he had easily defeated, and Alexandra rated the blow at 20 points. The next moment, Theodore walked up to the lying knight and pressed his head to the floor with his foot. The man was indignant and said that he was a knight of the great empire of Sylvanus, and he would file an official protest. The prince said in surprise that he understood this. Then he turned his head sharply towards the princess and said, "He is his bride's dog, so it is better for his owner to decide." The formed couple locked eyes, and Theodore wondered what the princess would do. Alexandra was surprised. The knight, who was pressed to the floor, shouted what the princess was doing and told her to tell him to quickly remove his leg. He breathed loudly through his huge nostrils and wondered irritably why she was in no hurry to pacify him, but only looked confused and called the princess stupid. Alexandra looked at this scene in surprise. It was surprising to her that at such a moment he was able to think about it. But still, they always behaved like this, the princess of Sylvanus thought, irritated. During the road, they talked about how she didn't speak much and wasn't very intelligent, but she had a pretty face and a good figure. At this time, behind the curtains of the carriage, the princess was getting ready to change clothes and heard that they called her dirty, but if she washed her, everything would change. This unpleasant one asked that even though she was destined for marriage with that wild monster, wouldn't she be grateful if such beautiful knights as they gave her their love? When suddenly this man with large nostrils, right as he walked, looked into the half-open curtain, he apologized to her, saying that he did not know that she was changing clothes. He told his friend that he should have opened it a little later. What a wonderful view he had missed. Alexandra clenched her teeth and thought that now he was asking her to help. She thought that nothing could be done and went up to the prince, holding his hand. Theodore was surprised. But looking at his future wife, he saw that she was smiling at him quite sweetly. The beaten and unpleasant knight saw hope in these actions of the princess and raised his head joyfully. The prince of the kingdom of Irugo looked at Alexandra with interest and remained silent, saying nothing. How did his future wife, smiling sweetly, say that husband and wife are one body, one thing? How then her face suddenly changed and she frowned, saying that he should step on it again. Princess Alexandra continued to smile sweetly at her groom. The knight's eyes widened. Both men were extremely surprised by such kindness of their princess, but only Theodore was discouraged, and the knight was simply shocked. The next moment the prince grinned, bared his fangs, and looking tenderly at the girl, said as his bride wished. The man on the floor shook his head in different directions and said to wait, but the guy had already raised his leg up and looked at him with hostility. There was a heart-rending and very loud scream, which could even be heard outside the palace. One of the maids outside asked where this pig squeal came from. After that, the prince called the military police and ordered the man to take the prince to prison. Sasha examined her hand. She thought that Theodore's hand was very strong. Since he is a warrior, he easily dealt with that knight. Then the prince noticed a glance at himself, and turning around, he caught Alexandra's gaze and sharply turned his head away. The princess, smiling, put her hand on her chest and thought that she understood him, Theodore. Even though he was beating others, he felt delighted. But she respected his tastes. Thanks to him, she also enjoyed it. In general, he is a good person, although he is a pervert. She continued to look at him motherly, when suddenly His Highness froze in horror, frightening the policeman. He said something about an ominous look. And so she came to her chambers and looked around. Although she would only use it until the wedding ceremony, it was perfectly decorated. Everything was as if she was really welcome, even if others say that she came to Irugo to die. But she was really glad that she was leaving according to convenience. She thought that it would be nice to drink tea next time, while the princess was stuck in her thoughts and someone kept calling her. But she finally came to her senses and turned towards the voice that continued to call her and asked what she needed. The girl with the boiling water scar asked in a rage. What else was she asking? She said that no matter how much she called her, she did not answer. Meanwhile, at the door, 2 maid friends were guarding the door through which the palace servants had just been driven out. And so, making sure that all Irugo's maids had left the chambers, the 3 girls gathered together. They looked at her menacingly and turned to the princess and asked if she wanted to explain something to them. How then? Alexandra relaxedly asked the red-haired maid if she understood the barking of dogs. She didn't understand what the princess was talking about, and folded her arms across her chest and said questioningly that of course not, and asked why she was asking. When she suddenly asked understandingly that due to the inability to communicate with people, she had mastered the language of dogs, and said that they were really on the same level, her friend laughed. Lowering her head slightly, she continued to look at the maid and said that they couldn't even be dogs. The girls looked at their mistress in surprise and shock. Their eyes became very large. The red-haired girl irritably asked what this meant, but it was also true. They are not even on the same level as dogs. No sense of duty, no trust. They only eat sweet things and vomit up bitter things. Even dogs are nicer, and she said that at first she thought it was dogs barking somewhere, but this happens so often that even dogs are not capable of this. Companion. Palace companions are formed from ladies who came from the highest aristocratic families. They differ from ordinary maids and courtiers because they become interlocutors for the imperial persons or assistants in business, and this is usually the case. But these ordinary ladies, coming from inconspicuous families, enter the princess's palace and only giggle, little by little plundering the budget. The red-haired woman asked how she addressed them, whether she had forgotten the words of His Majesty, if he had found out about her behavior, what he would have done. Alexandra thought that today was a very busy day and she was already tired, and wanted them to leave quickly, and nodded his head and said that she was right about everything. The red-haired companion bared her teeth and frowned with rage, thinking about these absent-minded nods. If you think about it, she was always like this, no matter how much she was scolded and reproached. She was careless and could not understand anything, even when her holy clothes were trampled underfoot, even when rubble was added to her food. She was a fool who blinked her eyes and didn't understand anything. A stupid girl. That's why she was locked up. It's a shame because of this girl she had to go to Irugo. She didn't want to be a nanny for a forgotten princess. If only their family had more money, she told the princess through her teeth not to forget about her responsibilities. Princess Alexandra was surprised. She looked at her companion and asked about her duties. In response, the girl grinned and folded her hands on her chest and asked if she had forgotten and, reminding her, asked if death was not her role. The two friends looked at each other and asked each other what this meant and what the third was talking about. Fools who did not know about the emperor's plan. The princess, who was only batting her eyes, suddenly protested and mentally told her to nod quickly, because she knew this very well. But then the princess broke the whole comedy. She proudly raised her head up and said that she was mistaken, because they were in Irugo, not Sylvanus. The red-haired companion instantly went cold. All her plans and dreams were destroyed in a second with just a couple of words. The girl with the scar and the blonde in the pink dress were terribly discouraged by such a statement from the meek princess. The blonde said in horror that she was proud only because of this. The lady with the scar said loudly that she was afraid that it was true, but I didn't understand anything. But then Alexandra interrupted them and said that they really couldn't even be dogs if they had no idea how they should behave in the future. The ladies who were just shouting looked at each other. It's not time that she just interrupted them. They didn't expect such a reaction. Thoughtfully, the princess asked what she should do, since she only accepted well-mannered dogs into the house, what is usually done with wild mongrels. And she explained that they become trophies or prey for a predator. The blonde asked if the princess was mocking them. The lady with the scar said that they would report this to His Majesty. They said to think about what she would do then. The other agreed and asked if she had seen the reaction of the royal offspring. They said that she was mistaken. Even here, no one loved her. And then the princess said how stupid they were. She was wondering whether she should tell them. Is it worth showing these indescribable idiots the reality? And fixed her cold eyes directly on her companion. The red-haired girl who caught this cold and sharp gaze of her mistress became numb in fear. At the same time, the girl with the scar told Lady Rosemary to tell her something, and asked if she would let her get away with it. And while the lady's name was Rosemary, she was thinking about what had happened earlier, that all those blinking eyes in response to mockery and reproaches, they only covered her claws. It was the princess who used the mask of a fool, flawlessly deceiving everyone. The companion took a step forward. Alexandra said boredly that dogs understand human speech. They are smart. If they are told to sit down, they sit down. They say to wait, they wait, and wondered where she could find such a dog. Meanwhile, Rosemary had already approached her. Her whole body and face trembled with tension, irritation, and anger that burned within her. Opposite Alexandra sat with a calm, even emotionless face, simply waiting. But the moment that followed deeply struck Rosemary's friends, so that they opened their mouths in amazement. But it also surprised our princess, who did not expect such a turn of events and looked down. Her red-haired companion Rosemary rested her head comfortably on her lap. She repeated to herself how her mistress had impeccably deceived everyone, and all this time it was she who mocked the princess the most. If she is thrown into the hands of a princess in Irugo where she has no connections, then she will have no choice but to bark to survive. After their close friend made a parody of a dog barking, the other girls' jaws dropped. They looked and were surprised at Lady Rosemary, who, ashamed and trembling, was now pretending to be a dog. Well, what made Princess Alexandra happy and a satisfied smile appeared on her face was something she couldn't predict. She changed her position so quickly, she thought about the companion's red face turned away from her, because a person in danger can pretend to be a dog. She extended her hand to Rosemary's chin and lifted her head, saying that it was nice that she now had a dog. The girl continued to act rather amusingly at pretending to be a dog and thought that if she took up a task, she needed to do it carefully. This frightened her closest friend, and, holding her head, she asked Lady Rosemary what was wrong with her. Thinking that she had gone crazy, a real farce began in the room. Her friends were shocked to wonder what was going on here when Rosemary took the ball from the princess and barked like a dog. "Great," Alexandra said. "It turns out she can be nice," the companion mentally cursed. Although she had become a cutie, nothing could be changed if after such words she did not adapt to her. Then everything would be in vain. And the next moment, catching the princess's surprised glance, she barked again. Smiling, she was ready to do anything for the sake of survival. Princess Alexandra told Rosemary that she wanted to raise her to be a hunting dog. The girl was surprised. The next moment, the girl turned sharply towards her lady friends, looking at them angrily. The girls shuddered. They looked at Lady Rosemary in fear and wondered how she could even bow her head to that fool. People who don't understand the whole situation look at her like she's crazy. A hunting dog is good. She liked it more than being cute, she thought. She thought that she would bring the trophy that the owner wanted, and when she had caught all the game, she would have only one goal left, her last hunting trophy, the princess. Then Alexandra called Rosemary and said that she wanted to look at her hunting skills and suggested that they try again. The companion, who was pretending to be a dog, mentally cursed and, putting on a smile, continued to bark and thought that she would never forget today's shame. At the same time in the Irugo training ground, Prince Theodore, observing the area, exhaled heavily. In his head, there were thoughts about the people who were whispering behind his back about his bride, which he clearly heard, how low-born she was, which heir would be better for the country. But our prince knew and continued to convince himself that he was not ashamed of his origin, and sharply opened his eyes. The next moment, with a light but deft and precise movement of his hand, he made a blow with his sword, cutting a leaf that was falling from a tree, a wedding with the Sylvan imperial family, in whose veins, they say, gold flows, he thought. This is the obvious intention of the king, to compensate for his political weakness. As an illegitimate child, the struggle for the throne became more and more serious, and this battle could not be avoided. When suddenly the prince's right-hand man approached and addressed his highness, the man turned his head towards him. James, holding the cape in his hands, said that all the wars had gathered and called the prince to go to the meeting room. He agreed. Theodore put on the cape the knight had brought, and they headed to the meeting together, and the statues behind them disintegrated. The men greeted their prince by bowing to him. The knights, in their casual attire, continued to greet their leader as he advanced. And finally, Prince Theodore walked to the end of the hall and sat down on a soft sofa. He propped his head on his hand and frowned and said that they would begin the meeting. The knights unanimously agreed. A man with blue eyes and light brown hair, who was the first to greet the prince, said that he would begin with a report on yesterday's corpse of the monster. There were conditions for the transfer of the processing of stones. "They claim there is not enough wood at the Blue Turtle Guard Post," another man said. "There are also statements about an increase in the number of monsters, requests for help from the Red Raven, and requests from troops to replenish personnel." Therefore, the blue-eyed knight asked, why don't they carry out a large-scale cleanup before the onset of winter, and hoped that he would not neglect the management of the plain due to the war with Sylvanus. The men looked at the younger knight in surprise and thought about Sylvanus, looked at each other and asked what kind of person the princess was. James was calm, as if this did not bother him. How did one dissatisfied knight say that no matter how much he asked James, he didn't answer anything? He said that he was boring. The same cannot be said about James's subordinates, said another. This could cause problems. He asked what if they acted rashly because they liked the princess. But the fact that they liked Princess Sylvanus was no longer serious for him. James replied that this was the future wife of his highness, and told the man to choose his expressions. The knights were indignant and asked why they should now choose expressions when talking about the Sylvans being in a state of war. They should tolerate these scoundrels. Ine was asked if they were in their right mind, but the prince always had the last word, and he commandingly told them to shut up. An oppressive silence hung in the room. When Theodore turned to a guy with blue eyes named Jonathan, the guy raised his head, listening to his highness. Then Prince Irugo found if he found out why the princess was isolated, because she told him that if he searched a little, it would be easy to find out the facts. Then the guy's eyes widened and he looked at his master in surprise, taking a step back. And lowering his head down, he explained that before the princess's arrival, he came to him to make a report with information about the Princess of Sylvanus. But then the prince didn't even want to hear about it. He told him that it was good kindling material and, taking the papers in his hands, threw them into the fireplace behind and burned everything. His Highness thoughtfully put his fist to his chin and looked at the ceiling. Remembering this moment, his right hand James watched the master with interest. Then Jonathan, disheveled, loudly and displeasedly said that this was not all that he had threatened him with. More precisely, he said that if he wasted his time, they would let him in for firewood. He diligently wrote this report, and as a result, after it he could not say the letter P, since it is in the word princess, as well as the letter A, which is in the name Alexander. It dawned on his highness that this already seemed like the truth, and what he could do, and instantly told the young man not to cry. Otherwise, the carpet would get wet. Jonathan could no longer tolerate this attitude towards him. There were already tears in his eyes, and the next moment he threw the papers on the table and burst into tears. The men calmed him down. At the same time, Prince Irugo averted his gaze and said from now on not to delay news about her and report to him. The men who were calming the crying young man shuddered, and Jonathan himself abruptly stopped crying, and they were all interested in the fact that his highness had changed the order. Then the blue-eyed guy understood, but could not believe that when they met in life, his master liked the princess. Theodore said that although the war with the empire is not over, it is the most important key, so it would be nice to know everything about it. His subordinate knights were struck by this conclusion of their master, and they immediately thought that he was smart. But Jonathan was seething with anger that his work was being devalued again. His highness continued. He said that he could not find Nigel in any way. The knight explained that the general had gone on an inspection to the western front line. Exchanges had been accepted so that he could return through the main gate. But it seems that he was never used to life in the palace. The prince asked to say when he would return, and said that not only Nigel, but also other wars were not used to such life. His Highness Theodore said that everyone was gradually adapting, when he suddenly fell silent and fell into thought, looking at the floor. Moreover, Theodore suddenly said, the knights in his charge shuddered and tensed. They thought what he wanted to say, and why he paused. Jonathan thought that they were still in the process of negotiating with Sylvanus, but because they were currently discussing a peace treaty, they had become too relaxed. The dissatisfied man was determined and thought that they would accept any order from his highness, go through fire and water, overcome even thorns. At the same time, the prince was not thinking about the war at all, but about the bride, and then he seriously said that they should contact a cook skilled in making cakes, even if he is from another palace. The men, valiant knights, already ready for anything, bowed sharply and courageously accepted the order of his highness, when they suddenly realized what had been said and were dumbfounded. They asked in surprise about the cakes, not understanding what or why, but the prince was already turning in his head this cute little face that was happily eating them. The morning of the next day came. The sun was already high, birds were chirping loudly outside the window. The girl opened her eyes and could not believe that it was already day. She slept like the dead. I thought how long it had been since she had slept. Having washed herself clean, In clean clothes and a stable bed, she didn't want to get up. The sheepskin blanket was very soft, and she was turning from side to side in an embrace with a pillow. Then she patted the mattress on which she was lying and noticed that it very interestingly returned to its original state, very elastic. The girl's eyes never ceased to sparkle at the sights of everything new in front of her, and she joyfully began to play with the blanket, knocking on her knees like a child. But in the next moment she abruptly stopped and, clutching her blanket, looked at the person whom she noticed with her peripheral vision. Princess Alexandra, with tousled hair, disheveled after sleep, looked at the prince in surprise. The man looked at her sternly and interestedly while drinking tea and asked if she was having fun. The princess wished him good morning and changed the words to the day. She thought that she should be careful during daylight hours, but she thought that the maids would come to her. So she asked what he was doing here, to which Theodore asked why she was asking if a husband needed a reason to come to his wife's bedroom. The princess, sitting comfortably on the bed, said that they were not married yet. Then the prince asked if he could then come after the wedding whenever he wanted. Looking questioningly at her groom, Alexandra thoughtfully said no, and that she did not expect him to have free time. From such a statement, Theodore almost spat out his tea and leaned forward in shock. He heard this for the first time. The girl said that he just needed to wake her up and not wait idly. She asked if he had anything to do, to which the prince clenched his teeth and trembled in irritation. He thought that he was going to wake her up and wondered why he didn't do it. When he came to Alexandra, he first waited outside. This was the first time he ever waited for someone to wake up. But her maid Rosemary said that the princess had not woken up yet. The guy was surprised how she could sleep so much. He thought that the Sylvans were very small and she must be tired after a long journey, and decided to go to the training ground for now. The time was already 9 in the morning, when suddenly the training ground turned into hell for the knights at 11:30. The prince managed to listen to the report on the work, and so on. And so he again came to the door of Alexandra's bedroom when Rosemary said that they were all awake. But the princess had not yet gotten up. The guy was extremely surprised, or rather, he was even in a little culture shock from how much she could sleep, when suddenly they turned to him. The man glanced at the blonde, one of the maids, and said that the princess had a bad habit of fooling around and it was a bit problematic. And turning her attention to her friend with the scar, she asked if he would like to have a cup of tea with them before she woke up, and already brought a tray with a cup of poured tea to him. Theodore looked at the girls with displeasure. While they sweetly tried to find out his preferences, the prince recognized them. These are the same companions who mocked the princess when she first arrived in Iarugo. The day came, but the princess did not get up. The ladies of the court appeared before him, dancing unnaturally and blocking the way. All the components came together, and a puzzle formed in the prince's head. He thought that the girls were mocking his bride, and locked her in the room. Therefore, His Highness the next moment rushed between the ladies, blocking his path, almost knocking them off their feet. They asked what he was doing, deliberately intruding into the sleeping lady's room, despite the fact that he was a prince. But Theodore stood his ground and abruptly opened the door to the bedroom. Moving closer to his wife's bed, he watched as she smiled peacefully in her sleep and luxuriated in her bed. The expression on her face was beyond words. Even sleeping, she looked like the happiest child on earth. His husband was, again, in quite a bit of cultural shock from the picture he saw in front of him, because he had already come up with all sorts of things. Remembering this story, how he ended up in the princess's room, the prince embarrassedly took him aside, and his cheeks blushed barely noticeably. And while the prince awkwardly avoided the gaze of his future wife, she was able to catch this strange behavior. She was very surprised that Theodore was embarrassed by something. His shoulders were trembling with tension, and his eyebrows met on the bridge of his nose. The man who looks at the girl, unable to wake her up. Alexandra thought about it, because this was a fairly popular situation in films. Now she seemed to understand everything, albeit in her own way, and therefore she called Theodore. The man turned his head towards her. With sparkling eyes, Alexandra asked that he couldn't wake her up because she looked like an angel, and that's why he was embarrassed. The man was extremely shocked by this statement. To some extent, he was even frightened by the fact that she noticed his facial changes. But the princess continued. She said that he quietly made his way to the curtain of her bed, and hiding behind tea, secretly looked at her. Such unusual conclusions terrified His Highness the Prince, and to some extent even embarrassed him. He became angry at this. The next moment, the princess looked pitifully at the prince and said that she respected that people had different tastes and asked if he could refrain from exercising them on her. The man was already trembling with anger that his own future wife was instilling such tastes in him and said loudly no. She said that she understood. The prince loudly declared that she looked like she didn't believe it, but in the princess's head there was already the concept that he pervert. The next moment, the irritated man abruptly put the envelope with documents on the table and, holding it out to the bride, took a sip of tea. Princess Alexandra asked what kind of papers they were, but she had already unpacked the envelope and taken out the documents and understood. Theodore said that this was a list of aristocrats who would participate in the event on the occasion of the delegation's arrival, and asked if it would be better to know their names before the afternoon audience with his father. Most likely, Alexandra thought, he should not have provided such important information to the princess of an enemy state, but he trusted her. Then she needed to meet his expectations and said that she should come not in advance, but at exactly the right time. The guy nodded his head and said that he supported. Otherwise, we would run into the royal offspring and be like an eyesore for them. When the princess said that she was talking about something else, the prince looked up in surprise and asked what she was talking about. Raising her finger up, she smilingly said that they needed time. There were things that needed to be taken care of before the audience and suggested that they eat first. The chief maid asked the courtiers if they had introduced everyone according to their titles. There should be no mistakes. This is a very important event. It was then announced that His Highness Theodore and Princess Sylvanus Alexandra had arrived along with a delegation. The groom said that they would enter together, but only she should represent the Sylvanus delegation. To which the girl, smiling emotionlessly looking forward, told her partner not to worry. Holding hands, His Highness Theodore and Princess Alexandra gracefully walked inside the hall, causing the various audiences to blush. Only Theodore's sisters, the princesses of Irugo, were unhappy with this couple, frowning and even nodding at the sight of the newlyweds. Some girls blushed in surprise at the sight of that same princess of Sylvanus and realized that the rumors were all lies. Believe me, the wife of everyone's beloved and handsome Prince Theodore was also an indescribable beauty. The princess bowed gracefully. She introduced herself as the first princess of Sylvanus Alexandra and greeted King Irugo. The man, smiling, said that the princess had come a long way. On behalf of the kingdom, he added that Irugo greeted her. The girl smiled contentedly and was about to understand her head when she heard a female voice speak and opened her eyes in surprise. The queen sat next to the king, and she said that she had heard that her journey had been long. Smiling, she asked if it was too heavy for her. She was very worried, because she decided to use old-fashioned carriages and not a portal. The princess raised her head in surprise, and for the first time in all this time was able to see the queen, and remembered that Theodore said that when he was 10, mercenaries came to kill him, but they failed, so he was sent to the front to fight the monsters of the plains. Then she asked if it was the queen. A positive answer followed. While the father was busy with foreign policy, the queen strengthened her position in the palace. The queen was supported by conservative aristocrats, and the entire new aristocracy was on his side. This was amazing. He was sent to the front at the age of 10. Despite little Theodore's talent in wielding a sword, he was just a child in a field infested with monsters. He was sent to his death. The queen is proud and strong. She will not be afraid of any way or means to put her son Harold on the throne. Smiling in her face, she said that the path was not easy and she was worried because she was using outdated carriages. But in reality, she said it, that the portal that had been locked during the 270-year war was reopened, and asked if she was the despicable one who was not allowed to use the portal. And so, on the outside she may seem affectionate, but if you look deeper you find all the pitfalls. That's how she was. When she went to meet the king, his children praised her, knowing how dirty she was upon arrival, because the higher you fly, the more painful it is to fall. This is the style of this family, but this will not work with her. Smiling, she said that she went on a journey to stop the rivers of blood flowing in the war. So no matter how difficult the path is, she doesn't care. The decoding was as follows. Peace between the countries depends on their wedding, and she is going to find fault. This angered the queen. And the princess continued. Because of the war, the common people of both states suffered, so she, as a princess, wanted to check everything with her own eyes and saw the life of the people. In comparison with it, her physical pain is insignificant. The queen put on an irritated smile and wondered if the girl was laughing. The fact was that the princess was not allowed to use the portal. The king grinned and said that Sylvanus's rabbit raised his daughter well, since the princess herself decided not to use the portal. They said behind her back that the princess was kind-hearted, because if she had no reason, she would have gone through the portal. Then, literally behind her, a new male and loud voice appeared. The girl shuddered and opened her eyes. The man said that he thought that since she was a princess, she would act arrogantly, but she turned out to be an easy person. He, Samuel, was deeply touched by her. The guy standing next to the man realized that it was sarcasm and told the count that this was too much. But Samuel said that this was a great thing and waved his hand towards the princess. "Look," he said, if the princess did not want to show off her best side, and asked if she would put aside her pride and appear in Irugo's outfit. After the instructions and words of the count, people around fixed their eyes on the dress and realized that it was true. They were so delighted that they did not notice any weaving or bows. Some said that this was Irugo's outfit. Others asked why, if she had brought dresses with her. The princess continued to listen to their empty conversations and, exhaling heavily, thought that she had expected this. Count Samuel, the queen's father and Harold's closest ally. But in fact, the Sylvans also talked to her about this. The girl with the scar asked what kind of clothes these were. She represented Sylvanus, so she should wear the dress that the emperor gave. But after a month spent on the road, the dress was dirty, and she could not put it on, and the main criminal ran away from responsibility. People asked the count if she really noted that this was her style now, to which the man mockingly replied that probably, after losing the war, the Sylvans decided to look good. Oh, this arrogant Sylvan, the count sewed, sent them not only tribute, but also a beautiful princess, who, as part of the imperial family, understands everything. His Highness Prince Theodore frowned menacingly. He thought about why he had spoken so recklessly about tribute. Oh, what a deep thought. He mocked all the Sylvans. The princess was indeed very insightful. The girl continued to listen to this childish babble, but having suffered all sorts of ridicule throughout her life, she already understood that it was too much and irritably lowered her head and looked forward. The voices said that they dared to attack their Irugo and even took away some of the territories, which is why it was so important for them to send the princess. They believed that they should have sent not the first princess, who was in captivity, but the second, who is called the Stone of the Empire, and this one knows her weak points, so she behaves appropriately. The princess was already tired of listening to this gossip taken out of nowhere. She understood that all the queen's people were hostile to Theodore, and so, with just a couple of words, they were able to cross the line, as if they were just waiting for this moment. The aristocrats laughed. As Alessandra said, strangely, the princess who stands in front of them is ending many years of hostile relations between states in order to establish peace. The laughter stopped. She arrives in a carriage and puts on their outfit, the girl continued, and they allow themselves statements that undermine the meaning of this world. They sound as if they want to start a war. Samuel said irritably that her speeches were very dangerous. They had only recently signed a peace treaty and asked how he could allow himself to say such words. Yes, of course, Alexandra said, smiling in response. He had no such intention. The count thought that so many times a disaster had almost happened and, smiling, said that he was glad that they had settled this misunderstanding. If he goes further, then she may be accused of disobeying the king. She has nerves of steel. He believed that she would tremble with fear, like an ordinary girl, when he suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes opened even wider when he realized that the princess continued to simply look at him without blinking. The man thought what she was doing. Why was she staring at him like that? As if waiting for an answer, Alexandra continued to pierce the count with a cold, emotionless gaze. When the princess turned to Count Samuel with a smile and reminded him that he had said that this was Irugo's outfit, he looked at her in surprise and, confirming this, asked if it was so, because no matter how you look at it, it was him, and said that it suits her very well. The next moment, Princess Sylvanus sadly relaxed her shoulders and lowered her head, exhaling heavily and dramatically. Sighing, she said that it seemed her expectations for them, like theirs for her, were too high and tutted. No, she overestimated it too much and tutted again. The man was angry that she tisked twice, that she dared to evaluate him. Count Samuel thought that this girl without a pedigree was nothing, and threateningly asked what kind of outfit this was. when suddenly, with a menacing and nervous frown, Patricia said that this was the Cariel Sylvastian silk. The Count shuddered anxiously. Turning sharply to the princess, he asked what this meant. Looking seriously at the princess, she told the Count to take a closer look. This pure red color shines like a warm ruby, of course. This is the same silk. Alexandra turned her head, smiling, and said that Princess Patricia was right. In Sylvanus, they are very proud of this silk, which they named after the country. It is Cariel silk of the highest quality. It is a pure shade of red, but it did not become part of the tribute. The people around admired, and the Count was horrified, realizing that this was the silk that Sylvanus was proud of, and that Arugo's outfit was made from it. It began to dawn on Count Samuel that she realized in horror and alarm that this was a complete failure. After all, it is a perfect fit and symbolizes the unity of the two countries in the dress. The princess happily thought that the Count had fallen for his own trick. She received only one outfit from Emperor Sylvanus. And then the outfit got dirty and frayed along the way, but these hyenas did not know about it. So before the audience, she quickly took a favor from Theodore. They wouldn't have time to make a sylvan dress because it takes a lot of time to cut and sew. Luckily, Irugo's clothes pay attention to the flowy shape. The silhouette came out too simple, but having agreed to decorate the dress with chains and accessories, she managed to quickly finish it. She wondered if she should thank him for reacting the way she wanted. When the princess said that initially this silk was a gift for His Majesty Nathan, the king was surprised. She smilingly turned to His Majesty and asked to be allowed to consider it a wedding gift. The king was delighted with such speeches and such an unusual gift, symbolizing peace, and looking at her, stunned, he smiled joyfully. Laughing, he said that this was his gift for the princess, a gift with deep meaning that suited her perfectly. Frowning his eyebrows, he pierced the hall with a cold and sharp gaze and grinningly said that only the princess among them thinks about the peace and future of the two countries. But the next moment, the king peacefully said that she was probably tired and told the princess to sit down. The married couple suddenly looked happily at their friend, and Prince Theodore extended his hand to his